Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, we will talk about ARM templates. But before we take a deep dive to the ARM templates, we need to know what Azure Resource Manager is. Azure Resource Manager, or ARM if you prefer the abbreviation, is an Azure service to manage and deploy resources using code. And that's why it's called Infrastructure as Code. Essentially, it is the deployment and management service for Azure. It provides a management layer that enables you to create, update, or delete resources in your Azure account. You can use Azure Resource Manager to deploy assets such as Microsoft Storage or Microsoft Compute. Apparently, there are plenty of benefits using Azure Resource Manager because you can manage resources from a centralized dashboard and integrate any other Azure resources you are using, including third-party applications. It makes it very easy to ensure that your resources are handled in a consistent way, which is very convenient when you work with multiple people, as we do in most companies. Now let's see what the documentation says about it. Azure provides 4 levels of scope. We have the management groups, the subscriptions, the resource groups, and underneath the resource groups we have the resources. We can apply management settings on every level, but we have to bear in mind that only lower levels inherit from higher levels. For example, if we apply a policy here on this development subscription, this policy will be inherited to resource group A and resource group B and all the resources underneath these resource groups. However, it's not going to be disseminated to the production subscription and the resource groups and the resources underneath the production subscription. Conversely, if we apply a policy to this resource group here, resource group A, it's not going to be applied to resource group B because although they are underneath the same subscription, they are on the same level. I think it's pretty clear. There are 4 ways to deploy resources on Azure. You can use Azure Portal, Azure Parcel, Azure CLI, and REST clients. Azure Parcel and Azure CLI use SDKs, but all those methods culminate to the same endpoint. And then Azure Resource Manager needs to accept, authenticate, and authorize the request. Afterwards, it communicates with the resource provider to deploy the resources based on the request. As we mentioned, there are plenty of benefits using Azure Resource Manager. We can manage our infrastructure through templates rather than scripts, which makes life easier. We can deploy and manage all the resources as a group rather than handling those resources on an individual level. We can redeploy our solution throughout the development lifecycle and have confidence that our resources are deployed in a consistent state, which is critical, I would say. Also, we can define the dependencies between the resources so they are deployed in the correct order. Also very critical. Last but not least, we can apply access control to all the services. ARM templates now. ARM templates are essentially JSON files that define your project's infrastructure and configuration. Templates use declarative syntax. You can specify what to deploy without writing commands of how to deploy it. Templates specify the resources to be deployed and the properties of those templates. And before we deploy a template, Azure Resource Manager has to validate it. For example, here we have a template, an ARM template, that defines a VM and its properties. So when we deploy this ARM template, we will see within actually this resource group, you will see a VM, a virtual machine, that has the same configuration that it was defined in the template. Here we have another template that defines an app service, and here we have an ARM template that specifies an SQL database, which has a link to the app service. This link here is defined within our template. That's why it's so cool. You can define the dependencies between resources. Of course, we can have a parent template, which includes nested templates, and you can deploy multiple resources in one go, which is quite convenient. Of course, there is always a downside. We have to try and limit our templates to 4 megabytes with parameters no larger than 64 kilobytes. Also, resource groups store metadata about our resources. So that means if a group region is inaccessible, you cannot update or manage those resources until the region access is restored. And we can also consider using YAML files. Now, when you have simple deployments, it's fine. ARM templates are fine, but when you have more complex deployments with multiple resources and multiple dependencies, it's easier to use YAML files because they can increase the readability of your templates. I think we covered enough theory for today, so let's move to a practical example to get a better understanding. The first thing we need to do is open VS Code and install two extensions in order to help us create ARM templates very quickly and very easily. Believe me, you don't want to build ARM templates without those extensions. It will be very cumbersome and very time consuming. So open VS Code, click on the extensions tab here, search for Azure Resource Manager and install the first extension that comes up, which is this one, Azure Resource Manager ARM Tools. And one more extension I like to use is the ARM params generator. So you will see in a bit why I like this extension. It generates the parameters very quickly. Now let's create a new file, a JSON file. Let's call it ARM template.json. And in this JSON file, if you type ARM exclamation mark, click OK, it will give you this this structure, and this is perfect in order to start writing, building your ARM template. We have the schema here that defines the properties available in this template. This is the version, the latest version. We have content version, but usually we use Git, so this is not necessary. We have the parameters, the functions, the variables, the resources, and the outputs. In this example, we are going to use the resources. This is what we want. And if you type ARM, and you see we have the autocomplete here, which is very useful, and type ARM does storage. Let's create a storage account that includes a container, but the first thing we need to do is create a storage account. Now this name is already taken, so we need to specify another name that would be storage demo apple. But here you see that we hard coded the value, but instead of hard coding the value, we can use parameters. So here, if you open brackets and click on new parameter, it's going to give you again the structure of how to define new parameters. As you can see, it's very easy. Let's call this parameter storage name. Now that we have defined our parameter, we can use it. So here next to name, we can use the parameter this time. Instead of hard coding the value, we need to open square brackets. Inside the square brackets, type parameters and open brackets, then single quotes, and provide your parameter. That's why I like this autocomplete. It gives you everything is ready for you. Let's copy that and paste it here as the display name as well. We don't want a premium LRS. We just click on the autocomplete again. It gives us all the options. Let's use a standard GRS tier. We need a standard tier. We don't want to get charged for this example that much. So we have defined a storage account here with a storage name that we pass as a parameter. Now we haven't provided a storage a value to this parameter yet. We will do that in a bit, but actually let's do it now. Let's you see here, that's why I like the param generator extension. You click here, select or create a parameter file to enable full validation. Click on New, All Parameters. It's going to create a ARM template.parameters.json, which is perfect. This is what we want. Now we have a separate JSON file to define our parameters to provide values. So let's call this storage demo apple. That would be our storage name, right? We click on save. Let's go back to our templates. So you can see here it links this storage name into our main template, and you can see the value, which is perfect, right? We have our storage account here, but we define the storage name and the display name of this storage account. We change the SKU name and the tier. We can create a container that could be hosted, let's say, inside this storage account. So let's create an ARM storage blob container, and you see here we have the account name, it slash default slash blob container name. That would be our container name, and the account name is the account that we define, the storage name that we defined up here. So what you can do here to parameterize this name is use, let me open brackets, then type format function, and then in the format function use 0 slash default slash 1, and then comma parameters, and that would be our storage name, and then we want our storage comma parameters, that would be our storage account, our container name. And here let's define container name, another parameter called container name. We need to define a new parameter here. Click comma, then new parameter, autocomplete, new parameter, define your parameter here, container name, and click on save. And we have our container. So this name here would be our storage name slash default slash our container name. The default, you have to use default, is the default path for your container. Account name here, again, just copy that. It's our storage account name, copy that here. Perfect. Public access none, that's fine, it would be a private container. So I think we need to define here the value here of the container name. Let's define the value, and yep, sorry, quotes, we need quotes, and container name. You see, that's perfect. It auto-completes everything for you. That would be container demo apple. We click on save, we go back, hit save again. Sometimes it gives you this red, like an error. But if you just click on space and save again, it's fine. And here we have, I think we are good to go. Like, we can deploy a storage account here with a storage container inside the storage account with all those properties like the standard GRS, the standard tier, and this container with this container name that we defined, and public access would be private. But we can also, let's deploy also an SQL server, an SQL database. Type ARM SQL server. First, before we create a database, apparently we need an SQL server. We can define another parameter here. Let's call it SQL server name. And we need to define new parameter, SQL server name. We have it here, and now let's use again we open square brackets, type parameters, open brackets, single quotes, SQL Server name. We provided the name, the same display name here. Admin, administrator login. Again, we can create a parameter, admin, comma here, double quotes, new parameter, SQL admin. Again, we scroll down, we replace the admin username, square brackets, parameters, open brackets, single quotes, SQL admin, and the same for SQL administrator login password. So if we define one more parameter, double quotes, define a new parameter, pass, and here we can define, we need to pass our parameter here, open square brackets, parameters, open brackets, single quotes, and pass, right? Which is fine. Here we have our firewall rules. By default, it provides you firewall rules. Here, SQL Server 1. So let's copy the parameter we have here, paste it here. I think we are good. Now it's time to create an SQL database. So use ARM SQL DB. Perfect. We need to define the SQL Server 1 here and SQL database 1. Okay, so for this one, we can use the concat function. So open square brackets, type concat function, and then we need to provide one value that would be SQL Server name, apparently, and another one. Let's hard code this one because I got tired of defining parameters. Let's call it slash SQL DB Apo demo. That's fine. Display name, again, the same thing. Let's type it here, actually square brackets, and paste it here, the concatenation, SQL Server 1. We copy the parameters, SQL Server, paste it here. It's going to create a simple database with this configuration. But as you can see here, there is always this depends on, right? So let's go back to the top and see again our storage account. We have defined the storage account, right? But then when we define our container, this container depends on the storage account. So we cannot deploy a container without the storage account because the container is hosted in the storage account. So you have this depends on property that you actually define the dependency between the resources. So the container is dependent on the storage account. So first we need to deploy the storage account and then the container. This is how you define the order of how you deploy your resources, right? We have the API version. We are using the latest API version. Otherwise, I suggest you use always the latest API version because Azure has, you know, Azure resources have new features all the time and there are updates and stuff. So you are going to miss out on those updates. That's why I suggest you use the latest API version. Then we have to define an SQL Server name, and this SQL database, again, it depends on the SQL Server, right? You cannot have a database without an SQL Server, so that's why we use the depends on property here. But we can also use the depends on property here in the SQL Server. So when let's use one here that depends on property as well. And the reason we're going to do that is actually that I'm going to show you the dependency on uh, on a graphical, you will see in the graphical interface that Azure provides. So here that depends on the same. Actually, no, you can just copy and paste it from here. Just copy and paste that. Depends on, and here paste that here. So the SQL server is going to be deployed after we deployed our storage account. So the SQL server is dependent on the storage account, and you will see what I'm talking about in a second. We need to actually provide values to our SQL server. Let's again double brackets. We have to define SQL server name. Uh, Remove the comments, because when you are going to deploy the ARM template, it's going you cannot use comments. It will give you an error, right? Let's provide a value for our SQL server name, SQL server demo Apple, and then we also need to provide SQL admin. That would be, well, let's call it I move this dot here. Let's call it admin 123, and let's provide a password for our SQL server. That will be test 123 exclamation mark. We save that as well. Just click on space, save again, and I think we are ready to go. Now we have to copy this whole JSON file, and we need to paste it on Azure custom deployment. You will see it now. On Azure, you see here I have this deploy a custom template, so you can search deploy custom template and click on the deploy a custom template. Click on that. Click on build your own template in the editor. Paste our JSON, our ARM templates that we just created. Click on save, and as you can see here, click on visualize. It's going to provide you a graphical interface of your resources. And as you let me zoom in. Come on, what happened now? I think I lost. Let me go back again into visualize. There is a dependency between the storage account and their SQL server. Now, here, the SQL server depends on the storage account. It's going to be deployed after the storage account. And this is how you see, I really like this visualizer, because you can see the dependencies of your resources. Now, if we go back to our custom deployment, you can click on edit parameters. Here, it will give you a JSON. You can use this JSON here, that the JSON that we created with our parameters, and paste it here and click on save, and it's going to fill in all these parameters, because you can see the parameters that we defined in the ARM template here under instance details: the region, the storage name, container name, SQL server name, SQL admin, and the password. Now I'm going to use a resource group I have, and I think we are okay. We'll click on review and create, and the validation passed. Click on create. It's going to deploy our resources now. It's going to take a couple of minutes, because we are going to deploy a storage account, a container that is hosted in the storage account, and then an SQL server and an SQL database. So it will take a few minutes. I will come back when it's done. Our deployment has finished. As you can see, we ran all those steps. First, we created the storage account, then we created the container inside the storage account, the SQL server, the firewall rules of the SQL server, and the SQL database. We applied those, those steps sequentially. Now, if we click on Go to Resource Group, we will see our storage account here, and you will see underneath containers, you will see our container here, which has public access level is private in this case, right? But we have created a storage account and a container. Also, we created an SQL server and an SQL database. If you click on the database, for example, let's go into Query Editor and log into the database. It's going to give us an error because I have to click on the overview, set server firewall, and add my IP address, click on save. Let's go back to our database again, SQL editor, click on OK. Now I think I need to provide a password here. Yep, here we just accessed our database, and we can write our select queries and stuff. But now let's see one more thing I need to mention. So here is how you deploy resources, right? And we deploy the storage account and SQL server and an SQL database. Now the good thing about Azure ARM templates is that when you update properties in the ARM template and you redeploy those templates, the new changes are going to overwrite the old ones, but this happens only if we use in the latest API versions. So let me switch back to VS Code. For example, here that we have defined our parameters, let's provide a new password. Let's add a 4 in the end. Click Save here. And also, let's change a few properties. For example, in the storage account, now it's a standard GRS. So let's use a local redundant storage, right? And tier standard. And for example, another one we can change is the public access of the storage container. Let's use container. Click on save. Now copy that and let's go back to Azure template. Back to Azure templates here. Click on redeploy and update your template. Click on edit template. Paste the new changes here. So we have applied container. We changed the public access to container for our container, and we use the local redundant storage for our storage account. Those are the changes we made. Click on save. We can click on edit parameters as well. Let me click here and add a 4 in the end. Click save. Select the same resource group apparently, and now we are going to redeploy those the same resources. Click on create, and the changes will override the last ones. So we are going to see that our storage account has a local redundant storage now, and our container has container access instead of private. It's not private anymore, and our SQL password has been updated. Let it finish. It will take again some time. Okay, the deployment has finished. Let's go to our resource group again and see the changes. So if we go into our storage account, you will see, if you click on refresh, you will see the locally redundant storage instead of the previous one. And if you click on the containers, you will see the public access level is container instead of private, like before. And let's go to our SQL database, Query Editor, If we provide the previous password, we are going to get an error, right? 1, 2, 3 exclamation mark. No, this is not the right password. So let's provide the updated one with the 4 in the end. Click OK, and we have access to our database. This is it for today, guys. As you can see, it is very easy to deploy multiple resources in one go using ARM templates. Of course, normally you could have more complex scenarios with lots of dependencies and lots of properties. However, now you know how easy it is to deploy resources using ARM templates in Azure. I strongly recommend to install those extensions in VS Code about Azure Resource Manager. They will make your life much easier. Otherwise, you will get frustrated pretty fast, typing everything. I hope you enjoyed the video and you understand ARM templates better now. If you liked the video, click the like button and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.